Today's episode is sponsored by EditPods. EditPods provide full-service podcast editing that's all in one podcast editing without breaking the bank. Now, one of the biggest problems that I have when running this podcast is the time it takes to edit, clip, upload, and post my podcast in all of the right places with some new artwork, links, descriptions, and all of the jazz that comes along with it. Now, what EditPods do is help podcasters skip all the hassle and focus directly on making the best show possible, freeing our minds to help hone the craft instead of spending time writing copy and doing transcripts and finding links, all of these time-consuming activities. So, EditPods work with podcasters that want to focus their time on areas of excellence and take the rest off their plate. If that sounds good to you, you can use the coupon code CHATTER to get $30 off Basic or Plus, or $50 off of Premium for the first month. That's CHATTER, CHATTER, for $30 or $50 off your first month at EditPods. Make podcasting fun again. At some point, I have to just be like, look, all the evidence is here. Like, shut the fuck up with these stupid debates, as if there's like anything to debate on these issues at this point. It's like,
yeah, it seems like it's pretty clear by now, doesn't it?
Like, fuckery, lying, and corruption happened. Like, stop pretending like it didn't. Like, it's not like it's a secret.
And do we need to be shocked? Like, this wasn't the first time that all of that, as you succinctly put it, the fuckery, lying, and corruption is not new.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't shock me.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've seen that meme where it's along the lines of like, you either know history or trust your government. You can't have both.
Yeah, basically. I mean, yeah. I used to have like far more trust in the government until like about 2 years ago.
It's funny. Something must have happened about 2 years ago, because that seems to be a very common feeling among a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, my trust of them had been rapidly deteriorating as I learned things about them from like 18 to 20, 25, 26. Brexit had definitely accelerated that. Like, not so much the vote itself, but just the way it was handled by the politicians. And then, COVID just made me realize that, like, even in times of, apparent grave emergency, like, they're just ready to line their pockets. Like, it's quite stunning. I mean, that anyone actually believes they care. But anyway. Look, so
that classic idea of you don't let a good crisis go to waste, right? I think there's a bit of that,
isn't it? But anyway, so hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I'm here with Paul from Critical Sway. Paul, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks so much. Great to be here.
No problem. So so I came across you on Twitter for the first time and was intrigued immediately by your Twitter bio. The government paid me to influence people and uncover secrets. I do the same thing now, but I work for you. So do you want to explain to people as much as you can, perhaps, about your background and then why you decided to start your site? Yeah,
sure. It's at first I'll say, obviously my bio worked if it grabbed you and you kept reading, so I'm happy about that. I say this to people all the time. If you want to have a really interesting career with fantastic experiences and great training, but a really empty resume or CV, like the covert intelligence world is a great place to do it. So, look, I'll say what I can say about what I've done before, and I'll leave out a few specific details. But so I've worked in the investigation side of the criminal sort of investigation world, and I've also worked as an intelligence operative. So they're kind of overlapping skills, but they're different jobs. So I've worked on serious and organised crime investigations. A lot of that sort of centred around money laundering. So that's kind of a flavour that transfers into all of my work now, I suppose. And then I also worked in the background in the covert intelligence space. And what I can say about that is really my job was one of influence and persuasion was a large part of what it was. And it was really talking to people and just understanding in the background what's going on a lot of big issues, related to the criminal intelligence and the law enforcement kind of world. So for obvious reasons, I can't say exactly who I worked for or where I did it. And like I said, I've got a pretty empty resume, but that's where I sort of picked up the skills that I'm hoping to transfer over now. And Critical Sway is a new project for me. It's you know, I was frustrated by what I saw as like a real complacency amongst a lot of people, you know, the general public, about what's going on in the world, or also a lack of understanding of, you know, what are the power structures that really influence what's happening in the day-to-day world for people. And I thought, perhaps I can bring the skills that I've had in, you know, from my past life and bring it into this and work on some independent journalism. And Critical Sway is sort of like my toe into the water in that world.
Yeah, man, it's really cool, and I like the way that you've put it. It's just that I think it's a lot of people just aren't, or maybe naive enough, or not even naive, because that makes them sound like stupid. But there's just like the people with the real levers on, or the real hands on the levers of power, are often very obscured, and where ideas and decisions come from is often sort of very unclear, especially unless you're really willing to go look for it. And the press are not willing to go look for it, or they're very happy to, until the point where it, you know, suddenly becomes inconvenient for the owner of whatever paper they're working for. Like, say if you had one of the richest men on the planet owning one of the oldest newspapers. Or if you had the actual richest man on the planet buying one of the biggest platforms in the world. I don't know how Twitter's going to go. I'm really curious.
I'm really on the fence about this. You know, there were a lot of, you know, like I'm involved in the Bitcoin community, and like, you know, I like all of that sort of stuff. I think there's a real future in that. But, you know, those guys are really vocal about the importance of decentralization, and, you know, at the same time, there was this real celebration from a lot of the guys about, you know, Elon making a move on Twitter. And I thought, I don't know. That's now one man owns it. Is this necessarily like an improvement? I understand that the message right now is good, but you're really concentrating power into a very small circle. And I'm not sure. I'm interested. I'm on the fence. I don't know how it's going to play out.
I mean, if he does all the things he says he's going to do, I'd be very pleased. But that's rarely how these things go. So
rarely. Yes. And, you know, even on that vibe, like, even if he does do all the things he says he's going to do, the trouble is, like, you concentrate all of that power in one place, eventually someone else will have that power. You know, like, even if the person who's got it now is a saint, what happens when it gets handed on to the next person? I think that's where that whole centralization thing is a big issue, right?
Yeah, that's where it becomes like really, really dangerous, I think. And it's just that, and this is what I think I keep saying to people who are like, yeah, give the government more power. Like, I trust the government. It's like even if I'm like, what? But anyway, even if I'm like, okay, but you trust this government, like you trust these guys.
Yeah.
It's like,
exactly.
Eventually, they're not going to be the ones standing there, and it may very well be as pendulums and sort of, the left and right thing swings through countries, because it does. You know, one party says they've got the ideas, and then everyone goes, oh yeah, fuck those other guys. And then when the other guys fuck up and goes, oh well, how did we ever trust those guys? These other guys, they're the ones. Exactly. Like, it just swings back and forth, and eventually it's going to be someone that you don't want in power, and then then they've got their hands all over like these ways of manipulating, controlling things that you just perhaps never imagined could be put to the use of someone that you ideologically don't agree with. And then all of a sudden you sat there wondering how you got here. So,
but you know, there's some value in this idea, Josh, because if you convince people that like concentration of you know, power or authority on one place is a problem regardless of who has it, then it's a much easier debate to have with people. You know, like I spoke to someone recently, and I used this Bill Gates influence over the World Health Organization. I said, if you talk to the average person walking down the street, and I'll leave my personal opinion of Bill Gates out of this for a second, right? But just talk to the average person walking down the street. This guy's like a computer geek, super rich. He's a philanthropist. You know, he's built this massive company, and now he wants to spend some money on helping develop vaccination programs or health programs for people around the world, and often the message is about equity and equality, and people that wouldn't have it otherwise, and all that sort of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you start talking to that person from a point of view of trying to convince them that maybe it's not as wholesome as it might be presented, that's a long way from the reality as they already perceive it right now. But if you talk to them from the point of view of like, hey, all right, let's just start with this. Any one person with that much influence, that's a problem, because then one person only has to be corrupted, or one person only has to pass that power on to one more person who's not the saint that this figure purports to be, and we've got a huge problem. So it's like, that's actually maybe an easier argument to make a lot of the time, I think.
Yeah, quite possibly. It's like it's like in the film Gladiator, where Marcus Aurelius is this wonderful, wonderful emperor, and in real life, where he was actually a wonderful, wonderful emperor of Rome, smart man, brilliant man, and then his son is an absolute tyrant who then takes over takes control of Rome, and the film apparently does like a really poor job of displaying just how evil and awful his son was. Which says something, given Joaquin Phoenix's character is not possibly the nicest villain in the history of cinema. So, and this is exactly what happens. Like, you get, everything can be wonderful when you have like a just leader, and then as soon as someone who doesn't have the same restraint or maybe moral philosophy comes into power, you're at their mercy. So yeah. So before we get to Bill Gates, I wanted to start with the story about JBS, these Brazilian butchers, because I was really interested by this, because I'm about 99% sure they own Moy Park, which is one of the biggest poultry farms in Northern Ireland, which is where I'm from. So so basically, you've called it corruption, cars, kickbacks, and cheap credit. Like, do you want to run through the story a little bit?
Yeah, so like high level. So let me go back, and I don't have the dates in front of me, so I'll do my best. But
I've got the thread here, so I'll try and keep you right.
So I think Dad kicked this business off, mid 50s, and maybe it might be 1953, something like that. A Brazilian man starts this business, meat processing facility, a small abattoir. Can do a few head of cattle a day, and from there, this business grows and grows. And eventually, if we fast forward a bit to the interesting part of the story, he hands control of the business over to his two sons. Now, these two sons, brothers, at this point, current day, these guys are billionaires. Like, they're very wealthy, right? They have a very aggressive agenda to expand this business and buy up more meat processing, more food production around the world, and it ultimately, fast forward, and it turns into an absolute behemoth. The problem comes in where the brothers' strategy for obtaining finance is a little bit interesting. Basically, they've used some corrupt dealings and some kickbacks amongst like a large number of Brazilian politicians to get their hands on some really cheap finance. And then using that cheap finance, they've gone then out into the broader world and acquired a lot of other existing really large companies. And I think the real step change in it is when they buy a company called Swift from the US. Swift is huge. Swift owns their own business in the US, but then they also own subsidiary companies all around the world. And so by virtue of this takeover that JBS make of Swift, they then essentially inherit all of these other businesses as well. They get a huge amount of the food processing in Australia, obviously in the US, they're huge in Brazil, and it just spreads out across the world. Ultimately, eventually, this all comes out in an investigation by Brazilian authorities that all of the loans that financed this massive aggressive expansion were quite shaky in the first place. And in fact, one of the two brothers who runs the companies admitted in interviews with Brazilian investigators that actually none of this expansion could have been possible without access to this corrupt financing that they managed to get their hands on. So that's kind of the origin story of the business, notwithstanding the fact that this has all come out, and the brothers have been to different extents prosecuted for their involvement in these things, right? They've seen the writing on the wall. They've done some deals with Brazilian prosecutors, which is by no means unusual. That sort of thing happens. But basically, they've agreed to give up a few other people and to cooperate with the authorities to quite an extent in return for some very lenient sentencing, which is my understanding of what's occurred. The thing that really grabbed me about this story is when you look at global food supply chains, they are extremely concentrated. And like I've banged this drum already today about like the dangers of centralisation, which is like a real key theme in the things that I write about. But these guys are like the biggest meat producer in the world. They have a massive amount of their food supply cornered, and the whole empire is kind of built on this really shaky moral foundation of these dodgy loans. And if you go searching on the internet, and I won't go down this whole rabbit hole, but there is all sorts of shady dealing that seems to be reasonably reliably linked to JBS. So I guess the first half of that story was, that origin story about how shaky it was, the building of the whole thing, and like what's the moral underpinning of this whole company that's feeding so many people and it's in control of so much of our food supply. But I actually think the centralisation thing is the bigger threat, as I wrote in that thread. Let me pause there, and I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, put a few figures on the things that you'd said here. So you mentioned that they paid like a small fine, or they paid a fine at least, just $3.2 billion.
Yeah, just the lazy $3 billion. Yeah.
Yeah, just as you do. And they helped. It says that they obtained secret recordings of the Brazilian president as part of their like plea deal.
Yes, there are like hundreds of recordings and hundreds of involved politicians in this whole thing. And part of their kind of like their side of the story is like, this is business as usual at this point in time in Brazil. Like this is how things went. Like you had to grease a few palms in order to get anything done. And they kind of minimize their badness in that way.
Yeah, they bribed, apparently. A JBS executive admitted, I say apparently, I'm reading off your thread. It says...
apparently according to me.
Yeah, apparently according to you. But I mean, you have sources. I've looked.
Of course.
So, yeah, it says they admitted to bribing 1,829 politicians, 1,829 politicians. And the bribes alone added up to over $175 million. So they must have been working if they're willing to put that much money into it. But it's just like huge figures. Like you just imagine that, like, you imagine there's some level of corruption, but then like there's also just getting into the way they've acquired this credit through these bribes. It's like they wouldn't be this big if they hadn't had the access to that cheap credit, and then they wouldn't have been able to. They wouldn't have been able to expand the way they did, and then you would have been just, and they just, you pay this fine on the monstrous profits you made, but no one's ever going to like deal with the fact that you shouldn't exist as a firm if you hadn't had access to like illegal levels of credit. And it just reminds me of the audacity that is like coming to light amongst like the financial institutions in America, where they're all just like one by one, like slowly like admitting in plain sight that infinite liquidity exists and that they just have access to all the money that they want. And it's like, hang on, wait, what? Like,
but but forgive me if I'm not perfect. If there's an economist listening, they might hate me for this. But my understanding is like that so fractional reserve, like the amount of assets that a US bank has to actually hold versus the amount they've got out on the street, so to speak, is 0% right now. Like around the start of COVID, they just removed the level. Mm-hmm. So then you've got the money printing that happens, at like a treasury central bank level, but then it's multiplied however many times, once it gets to commercial bank level.
Yeah. but they also have access to like trillions in credit, just like endless amounts of money in credit that they can just demand that the Fed just give them. Basically, they will just give them like I said, infinite liquidity, and like this is
Incredible.
it's like something that was never spoken out loud, and it's starting to come a little bit to light. But again, people just ignore it. There's infinite liquidity. What's that? It's just like they have all the money that they want, and they will devalue your currency as much as they fancy while they spend it. Like it's yeah.
Have you heard of this term, the Cantillon effect, Josh? Do you know what this is?
I haven't. No, actually.
So the basic idea, and I'll butcher this a little bit. I always joke that I'm a high school dropout, so if I've managed to understand it, it's going to be in a very simple way. But essentially, what happens is, so say a central bank creates a large amount of new money. Eventually, as it goes through the economy, it's reasonable to say that devalues the money that's in the economy now, on a per unit basis. Like the value of $1 is worth less than it was before because we've like diluted the money supply, right? But that doesn't happen straight away. So the people who are closest to the spigot of the new money, right? Whoever's closest to the tap, they get to spend it before the inflation, the price inflation happens down the track for the average human. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that's one of the massive issues with this, like, massive monetary inflation that we've seen is that like the rich people or the very well-connected people and institutions that are closest to this new money that get their hands on it first get all the benefit of it and don't pay any of the bills, and then the fact that prices go up or the value of your house goes up or all those, people who want to buy a house or want to buy a steak or a carton of eggs, all those sorts of things as time goes on, they pay the price for it. So this whole like money printing thing and the Cantillon effect that happens around it just sort of disproportionately benefits those who are already wealthy and harms those who are not, if that makes sense. So that's one of the huge issues that comes with it.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with this idea. I just didn't know the name of it. So it's
the term, yeah.
So essentially, I've spoken about this idea when it comes to the idea of quantitative easing that was going on before COVID. And when they attempted to taper off this flow of money in 2019, like the economy nearly crashed. Like it was, and no one knows that this happened. Like I had no idea, and I like to think I'm at least like relatively well informed. And I'd just literally no idea that the economy had almost crashed in 2019, and they had to get these monstrous, again, like trillions of dollars in order to stay afloat. But yeah, it's pretty wild. And like you said, that the money goes straight in. So like how quantitative easing would have been used is like in 2000, from 2010 to 16-ish, was to go in and buy assets at the top of the stock market. And then, as you said, the prices there get pumped up. And then by the time that everything has, not trickled down, I don't like that term, but like by the time that anything has happened, it's wait 2 years and then our spending power has diminished while the price of assets has been pumped up, and it's just like a form of wealth transfer. It's watching like the rich get richer and richer and richer and richer and richer, while we all sit around twiddling our thumbs and hoping that our shit coins are gonna moon. So
it's nefarious. It's nefarious, right? Because the average person has no idea how that part of the financial system works. It's actually quite incredible, the degree to which people are naive about money when you think that no adult gets to get up and go through their day and not deal with it. Like it impacts everyone, right? But people have no idea how it works. But if you think about all the things that our governments are willing to throw money at and fund, without doing a detailed list, I'm sure you can think of a few recent expensive ones. They'll never get away with it by overtly taxing the citizens. That won't work. People will kick up a fuss. They won't be happy about that. So instead, what they'll do is they do this money printing scenario, which just sneakily steals the value out of your bank account without asking you. Because the $10,000 that you've managed to save over the last 20 years of your life that are sitting there in your bank account doesn't buy as much stuff as it used to. So nominally, you got the right amount there, but they stole all your value. Yeah. So it is super nefarious.
Yeah, it's really disturbing. So, like it reminds me of this video that I was actually going to share if I can figure out how to share this for you. So, it's basically someone like displaying how to do corruption in broad daylight, like how to inside trade,
Brilliant.
like the senators from the U.S. government. So let me just see if I can make this share with you so that we can see. And hilariously, it's from fucking TikTok, which I hate. But I mean, it's posted on Reddit, so it's fine. It's not TikTok anymore when it's off TikTok, right?
Yeah,
That's
you got it from Reddit. Yeah, that's cool.
so okay. So can you see that?
Here we go. Yeah.
No, yeah. Let's see if this works. Okay.
The first thing I do is go to the House of Representatives website and see what bills are meeting for within the next.
Hang on. Let me see. Can I share my audio with you? That would be absolutely wonderful. Doesn't want to do that. Okay.
Next few weeks. And right away, I can see that on June 21st, the Committee on Appropriations is meeting to discuss a 2023 environmental bill. Next, I'm going to go check the lobbying data of stocks that have recently been lobbying for this. As you can see, 17 companies have spent money on it and likely have an interest in the outcome of this meeting. Next, I'm going to go get a list of the congressmen that are going to be attending this meeting. And with this information, I'm going to go find a stock that a congressman who was on this committee has bought recently. And that is on our list of companies that have been lobbying for this bill. And there you go. Lois Frankel bought shares of PPG Industries twice this year. And it seems that PPG has spent $250,000 in April for various bills regarding environmental issues. And as a bonus, they already have a history of winning government contracts, which is always a good sign. So if you want to do this for yourself, check out my website, Corporate Quant, where you can type in any stock and see what politicians bought it, how much they spent on lobbying, and their government contract history. Hope this helps.
It's just it's obscene that it's that easy to see how corrupt they are and no one cares.
Crazy. Yeah. That was someone actually showing you how to follow the money. You know, like everyone sprouts this, follow the money. That TikTok there it is in 1 minute.
Yeah, that guy's literally being like, so here's the money, follow it. And
I have an idea.
Yeah. So to get back to JBS then, because we're talking about the dangers of centralization. So then what is the moral of this story, and why is it important to understanding why decentralization of a food supply or any industry is bad?
Yeah, so let's go. Like the second part of that story, the origin obviously was all about this, corrupt nature by which they got to there. And then the second part of the story is like people like me and, all of us crazy conspiracy theorists go, oh man, that's, you've concentrated a lot of like the food supply into one spot. And what if it ever became compromised, and that sounds crazy until you realize that not only has that happened to similar organizations in the past, but it's happened to JBS and in recent history, right? So early 2021, I think is the date, off the top of my head, if I'm right, 2021, they get hit by this cyber attack, right? That basically grinds them to a halt. And you can think about, an abattoir, for example, where they're processing meat, but everything they do, like everyone else, is, controlled by computer systems. And if their computer system has been held hostage, then basically their operations are on hold. There's stories about like trucks full of cattle that are on the way to be processed, and this is like the meat at your supermarket ultimately that you're going to end up eating. They all just get turned around and sent back to the farm for a period of days. And the guys are basically held hostage to this ransom of, we're not going to release your computer system unless you pay the money. And so, it was just sort of like a little warning of how bad this could be if some sophisticated actor decided to hold a organization like that hostage. Then even if this sort of goes back to that thing of like, even if the people who are in control of these centralized organizations are saints, it's still a really crucial bottleneck and a really massive weakness. And so, like, long story short, JBS's computer system gets completely hijacked. They can't do anything. They can't process food. They can't pay staff. They can't. Nothing's working, right? Nothing can go on. And then after a few days, they basically are left with no choice but to pay the ransom. And JBS try and put a little bit of spin on it, and it's sort of along the lines of like, we basically almost had everything back up and running, but we wanted to just make sure no other data was compromised or nothing else went wrong, so we paid the bill. Oh,
It's a brilliant
God.
excuse, isn't it?
I can't look. I'm just going to call bullshit. I don't have evidence. That could be true, but I'm just going to say I don't think so. I think the only reason you pay a $11 million ransom is because you've got no choice. It doesn't stand to reason any other way. So then I think you go, okay, well, let's say this company, this one company, owns like the biggest beef pork processing in the world. I think they're number 1 or 2 for pork and number 1 or 2 for chicken. Like it's huge.
Mm.
Um,
I think it's
and
one
then what
one
if
for
you
beef,
just,
one for beef, one for chicken, and number 2 for pork. I think globally.
there you go, huge. And then I think, I made the point in that thread when I posted it is like, in this situation, the bad actor was motivated by money. So then enough money will fix it. And JBS, no dramas, getting their hands on cash, right? As they've well and truly proven, yeah. So they got plenty of cash, $11 million paid in Bitcoin, all done, ransom paid, operations back online, all good. But what if money wasn't the motivation? What if that's, the motivation is just to cripple the country or like to cripple the food supply? Like what if this is part of, quite deliberate modern warfare, that could happen? And what if, I think it's something like 80% of the food supply in the US, the protein supply, so animal-based products in the US, something like 80% is controlled by four companies. So what if someone decided to go for, a coordinated attack on 2 or 3 of them at once? And how quickly would that throw a country into chaos? So, my real overriding message with the second half of that story was to say, maybe we need to decentralize this a little bit because it's a bit of a problem. And morally, I don't have any big issue with breaking up JBS's monopoly over this thing. It's a stretch to call it a monopoly, but their grip on it, considering the way they got there, I think we could probably sell that. You know what I mean? That would pass the front page test.
Yeah. It's just it's stunning that these things go on, and then just that like no one's concerned about the centralization. Like a food, like people witter on about centralization of money, which is a massive problem, obviously, right? But like.
Right. Yeah.
I think what I found interesting about your site was that you were talking about centralization as a problem just broadly across like the entire economy, which is rare as a like people don't often make that extrapolation, or maybe they do in their head but never quite like specify it, because everyone sort of like it feels like the world is trending towards these like more centralized systems. And the more I look into and the more I understand about these massive like international organizations like the UN. I've had like a UN whistleblower on the show who is attempting to expose like their complicity in giving names of dissidents and families of dissidents to China, and no one cares. And they I don't know if you watched Tim Pool's show, they keep getting swatted. Someone basically did that to this woman in the middle of like the only meeting in which she could raise these issues. Like the UN sent the police to her house. Like like it was UN security officers or UN police, or I can't remember what the exact officers were. But yeah, they sent people to her house during the only meeting because they said she was an imminent threat to herself or others, as far as I remember. But yeah, like people can check that out in my back catalogue. But
I think if you had to boil it down, Josh, like that is the central theme of everything I'm writing about. I think there's 2 things, right? I think there's misaligned incentives that drive really bad outcomes, and I think that too much of the important things in the world have been concentrated and centralized to such a degree that it's really, really dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think if you applied that brush to every single thing I write, you'll see it.
Yeah.
It's like the food supply, the money supply, the media, the information, like everything is just centralized. And you mentioned a couple of times about like, that people are completely unaware of it, and they are. And I think we've got this, like, I describe this as a dangerous mix that's somewhere between ignorance and complacency, and it's probably caused by distraction. So we've got a world, right? So like rewind the clock 30 years, there was news on the TV once a day, and there was a 24-hour news cycle, right? We got like a 20-second news cycle now, like it is constant, all the time, all the time, all the time. You are constantly entertained and presented with new information, like at every waking moment of your day. And then you get this situation where like people are completely overwhelmed. They don't know who to listen to. They are distracted by shiny object, shiny object, shiny object all the time. Like if I find for me, this might happen for you. You're a content producer. Like you get stuck in trying to keep up with what's going on.
Yeah.
So you're not producing anything. You're just trying to keep up. And you're mindful of that. So just for the average person who's not thinking that way, it's so easy to just be led along by the nose.
Yeah, it is, and you get like, I mean, and I don't know if it's just because I'm like maybe like more aware that this is like definitely happening, or if they've got more just like let's just do it, and it's more blatant about it or something. But like when I look at the disparity between the coverage of Ghislaine Maxwell's trial and the Amber Heard Johnny Depp one, it was just mind blowing. Like, because okay, you'd expect like levels of secrecy at a trial that's got such sensitive topics, like there's sex trafficking and a lot of victims, especially ones that would have been underage at the time, and like you can understand like certain levels of secrecy, or like maybe some amount of like restriction of like the coverage of it, but like blanket nothing. Like Ghislaine Maxwell's trial tracker on Twitter, like banned, and the client list doesn't exist. Like
where is that? We should know every name.
Yeah, we should know every fucking name, and like unless they're all of them currently being investigated, like right this second, and the police have like imminent new numbers of arrests of the most powerful people in the world. It's like, I don't think so. Because that would be the only justification for like keeping them all.
And they
secret.
all already know. They all already know their names in the book, right? They know.
Yes.
So those guys, like the cat's out of the bag in that sense. So why hold back the information? And I've wondered about this. Like, right? Is it so? If I run a news organization, my motivation is to keep people watching the screen, right? So say I'm a TV news network, right? I want to keep eyeballs on the screen. So in one sense, what's driving it is what are people interested to see? And I'll service that. Like that's one motivation. But then is it as simple and pure as that? I don't know, because I'll give you an example. Like I wrote that thread about the World Health Organization and the pandemic treaty. And like I'm a minnow, you know what I mean? Like I don't have international reach and like advertising slots. I just wrote this thing on Twitter and it gets like 2 million impressions and it gets tens of thousands of retweets. And I'm like, well, that pretty much puts to bed the idea that people aren't interested. Like there's plenty of people interested. So maybe it's the other side. It's the control of the information, not the desire for it.
Yeah, I think it really is. Like, I mean, I don't know if you're aware of Piers Morgan, who was, very awful journalist / I don't know, we call him talk show host in the UK, and he's just like he's just an absolute outrage merchant. Like he's just he pretends like being a dick is being a good journalist, there's times where you have to be like a bit hardball about questions sometimes if you're interviewing politicians, but like this guy had the head of the union that's on strike, the rail union that's on strike in the UK at the minute, and spent like a few minutes like discussing his Twitter profile picture of like a character from Thunderbirds, and he's just like, is this the state of journalism? So he used to be on like one of the mainstream shows, Good Morning Britain, that would be like one of the biggest ones in the UK. And then he's moved over to a Murdoch run talk TV like streaming show thing. And a few weeks ago, the show by the end had 10,000 people watching, going from like a show that he would have had millions when he was on when he was on like Good Morning Britain, like the mainstream show. And now he's gone like, and along with like a Murdoch backed new platform being launched, like bus posters everywhere, like huge like murals, billboards. 10,000 people, and I'm like just laughing, being like,
Yeah.
like one of my like the recent podcasts that I did that was like that blew up a bit. Like two of them have more views than Piers Morgan. It's like really like well known mainstream journalist has on his show. It's like it
maybe
proves
maybe
me,
the tide's turning, Josh. Like maybe there's like a glimmer of hope.
yeah, I mean, but it's because he moved off of the mainstream. So like it's proof that like people don't actually care about these people and their stupid opinions of bad things. It's just that like it's still like the convenience of the mainstream news and the sort of like faux legitimacy of them because they're on the TV that I think still gives them a lot of power. And they're also still the ones that drive. Like we might like respond and say all these things, but they're still the ones that drive what the main stories are, unfortunately.
It's definitely the case. Like it's another centralisation question, right? But it's definitely the case that there's like a few, like really concentrated opinion leaders out there in the world, like that, and not necessarily people, but platforms that are just like that is where people are getting their information, or maybe confusing their information for their entertainment, but in the terms of TV. But like it's not decentralised enough.
Yeah. So so I mentioned the UN about these like big overarching like centralized structures, but obviously you've mentioned this WHO pandemic treaty, and it seems like a power grab, like most of the last 2 years has been. I've watched in the UK like people just completely fine with the idea of bodily autonomy going out the window, just the right to assembly and all of these things. Like it was fine for that to disappear last year and the year before. No one batted an eyelid. Like the UK government tried to bring in the vaccine passports. The Northern Irish government did succeed very, very briefly until it trashed the hospitality industry, and they immediately backtracked. And I watched them try to do this, and all of these people say nothing. And then I see Tory fascist dictatorship trending on Twitter every other day. And I'm like, you people were fine with this. Like, you were absolutely fine with this.
Yeah.
Like, wake up.
Yeah.
Just because you like the reason doesn't mean it's a good idea to take away the rights.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, which brings us nicely to the WHO pandemic treaty. So, do you want to tell people what that is and why some people were so freaked out about it?
Yeah. So obviously the WHO guide a lot of health decisions and health policy around the world. Now, I want to say this up front, right? So I'm not a scholar of international law, and the way the decisions that are made at the WHO impact different countries is quite nuanced, right? It depends on their legal structure and how all those sorts of things work. But if you just set that whole argument aside, because a lot of people are talking about whether anything the WHO does is binding, in effect, it is. Like whatever they do, the nations of the world and the authorities of the governments around the world, that they follow, right? So what was once a year, it's called the World Health Assembly, which is like the governing body of the World Health Organization. They have an annual meeting. They go sit down in Geneva, and they all talk about what are we going to do in the next year, and what are the things we're progressing from last year, and all that sort of stuff, right? So there were some proposals before WHA 75, which is the one that we've just recently had, that included two entirely separate things that were kind of confused by a lot in social media circles and in journalism circles. But there were two things going before this most recent assembly that I was really worried about. The first was we already have international health regulations. They've been around for quite some time now, and they guide a lot of the ways that the WHO make declarations, make decisions, give guidance, all that sort of stuff, and then how that is implemented in the countries that are signatories to this IHR, International Health Regulations, right? So one of the things that was going to be really critical at the most recent meeting of the World Health Assembly was a number of proposed amendments to the existing international health regulations. That was kind of sponsored by the US. They were the ones pushing that. That was co-sponsored by other countries, but there were 13 of those that they were putting up. At the same time, there's this discussion going on about the creation of what can, in plain terms, just be called a pandemic treaty. The WHO have used different words for it, and they use things like, they'll say things like some other binding agreement or some other lawful instrument or things of that nature. But broadly speaking, it's a pandemic treaty, and it's a proposal under development to give the WHO a lot more power and control in the event that we have another pandemic, something like the COVID-19 thing that we've had over the last couple of years, right? I had some really huge concerns with this idea. So I probably banged the drum enough. Everyone knows I'm not too happy about this idea of centralisation. WHO is like a perfect example of this, right? Where virtually every government around the world jumped when they said jump in relation to this last, COVID-19 situation. If all of this pandemic treaty that's being proposed goes through, this isn't my artistic language of it. This is the WHO's language. They really want to be solidified as the coordinating and governing body, right, in relation to a pandemic, right? So, and they would also end up with the power to declare a pandemic. And they use the term right now, public health emergency of international concern, which ironically, if you just like PHEIC on a screen says fake, but that's just how I would pronounce it. I'm not saying it is, just saying that's how I pronounce it, right? But so at the moment, you've got a situation, and this proposal strengthens it even further, where the WHO would be the ones to declare one of these situations exists and then decide the measures that get taken. That to me is like a huge concern, because it's so much power concentrated in one place, firstly. Secondly, their track record of getting these things perfectly right is not completely sparkling and spotless, right? They made some recommendations in this last one that were kind of like contrary to my logical ideas about how we could respond to it, right? And, as we've seen, it's caused quite a bit of chaos around the world. So I guess that's the background, that there were these things going up to be put before WHA 75, the World Health Assembly, to talk about, and for all the countries. So there's like 193, I'm going to say, member countries, right? So it's basically the whole world in there, and they vote on what things that the WHO are going to do next. And you could summarise what was being put up as like more power centralised at the WHO, more funding for the WHO, and more control over information, which is like a really big deal. And I'm sure we'll get into that, but let me pause again.
Yeah, I'm just running through some of the things that they're being proposed in this while you've been talking there. So it's interesting that they talk about the reduced risk posed by emerging diseases of zoonotic origin. Like, they're not concerned about the increased risk of diseases that might have possibly been altered and engineered in a lab. Just the naturally occurring ones. They're the ones that we need to worry about. Because it really weirds me out, man, that no one is curious anymore. It's like, you remember, this thing that's trashed the world for 2 years. Like, do you care where we got it? Like, at all?
Does that seem like an issue, or like who knew about it when and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah. It's like, and like the fact that when, so like, say like devil's advocate, like it wasn't leaked from a lab, right? I mean, Jerry Markson's book, What Really Happened in Wuhan, just convinced me that the chances of it not having been from that lab are very slim. Very, very slim. I mean, like when you read the evidence as she lays it out, you just go, so why are we not arresting people? She's actually a fellow Australian. She's a fantastic journalist. Like her, I can't recommend that book highly enough. And if she hadn't gone and got pregnant,
I think there were a
I'd have
few
her on the
very
show.
motivated Australians, which it might have come from the way the response was dished out here, which was, I'd say we're in the top 5 down here for countries that went from like liberal democratic values down to having things stuffed down our throats like quite quickly.
Yeah. Australia went hard and fast with it. I mean, then, but yeah. So then you just wonder, it's like, because they tested like all the bats and all the pangolins like in the area, and there was no virus in them. It's like, hang on. So you're telling me this like widely like spreading virus amongst like the animal population that jumped to humans has no, like, it's not in any of the animals you're telling me it came from? And that's before you get to like before you get to all the different research that they were conducting in the lab in Wuhan, and the lady who was involved in it, and the missing records about the, like experimentation on like bat coronavirus. It's just like, it just brings me back to that Jon Stewart bit where he's like, you know, if there's an outbreak of chocolatey goodness near Hershey's, Pennsylvania, it's just like, check the fucking chocolate factory. Like,
perfect.
Yeah. But I forgot where I was going with this. Yeah. But yeah, so would you like to talk a little bit more about what the World Health Organization are trying to do with this treaty, and why they're kind of, why they're claiming it's necessary, basically?
Yeah. So look, I mean, that basically the argument they run, which is logical, and you know, like this bit makes sense. They say, well, for example, an airborne virus is not going to respect a national border, right? So we need international cooperation to deal with these things. I can't poke any logic holes in that, right? Like, yeah, no problem. That makes sense. And the problem is that whole centralisation issue, but you know, like who's in control of this thing? So I kind of started diving into that whole, like, all right, so who are these people that make the decisions? And, you know, what are the incentives? Which, you know, as I said before, I think like misaligned incentives are responsible for most of the evils that are in front of us today on this earth. You know, like I think there are like a handful of people who are genuinely nefarious and capable of causing destruction. Mm-hmm. But I don't actually think it's anywhere near a majority. I don't think it's even like a big proportion. I think there's like a handful of really powerful, crafty people and a whole lot of people who just respond to natural incentives. Mm-hmm. And over time, behaviors end up aligning with incentives, right? So you got this huge issue at the WHO all around how their funding works. So it might surprise people to know that if you look at like the total amounts donated to the WHO in 2021, that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the second largest donor to the WHO. Number one's Germany. Number two is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and then all of the other countries follow behind that. So if we're going to talk about a massive amount of influence coming from one place, how do we feel about the fact that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the second highest contributor to the WHO? And if you layer on top of that, someone who might be responsible for most of the money that sits in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who I'm sure has a lot of influence over how things work there, notwithstanding the fact that it's a charity and there's a board and all that stuff, right? Mm. One person is responsible for the vast majority of the money that's sitting in there and has a very strong ideology about vaccinations being the way in terms of dealing with the health crisis, which actually you're allowed to challenge.
Crises is that's the only option. That's the
like how much, yeah. Josh, how much did you hear about like people making their immune systems robust?
Yeah, I was thinking about
this. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, like I was
that message was not delivered at all in any way,
and there was no reason for it not to be. Like, you know, I was just thinking about it. It was just like, look, before we even had the vaccine, and like say it's like provided some level of protection, for some people, it's like great, but like why are we not? This comes out and like anyone mentioning the idea that vitamin D, like the thing that's like good for your immune system, might not be helpful at all whatsoever, and that's dangerous misinformation. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, you just, you know, maybe try and like tell people to be a bit healthier. Like, it's so crazy that wasn't just discussed. And like early treatment, like even if someone has the fucking flu, like a really mild flu, right? It's like bed rest, you know, fluids. Like we have a prescription, like even however like stupid and innocuous it is. And for this, there was nothing, zero, nada, zilch. Stay at home until you have to go to the hospital. House. Stay at home by yourself till you have to go to the hospital. That was the plan. And so, what? And
crazy.
Yeah, it breaks my heart when you think about like people like say you're like 65, maybe 70. Like you're not allowed to go outside. You live by yourself. No one's allowed to visit you. And you just sat in your house, and then you get sick, and then you have to just stay there, getting progressively more sick until you're so sick that you can barely breathe and have to go to the hospital. And then you get to the hospital.
Let me tell you, I'll tell you a personal story on this exact note, right? So I have a son who's just had his first birthday. My mum, so his grandmother, right, has some health problems. You know, she's had leukemia for a long time. She's been treated a couple of times for that. You know, it's been in various states of remission and whatever. But, you know, she's in her 60s. She's got some really serious health complications, and she lives in a different state of Australia than I do. My son was 11 months old before he met his grandmother because of the restrictions we put in place around this in the name of COVID, right? And I'm real careful to say, not because of COVID, because of the response to COVID, right? So you got a scenario where people now I'm fortunate in the fact that things have changed here now, and she's been able to come and meet him, and that's, you know, that's great, all that. But it very well could have been the case, and it was for other people, that some people missed moments in life in the name of like protecting everyone against this thing that like they never get back ever. It's like, why didn't we have any discussion at all about the trade-offs? That was not allowed.
Yeah, and it's
crazy.
Yeah, and then to go back to your original point, then like I've got this. I had this chart up that I was sharing with everyone. I think I'm still sharing it with you. That shows what you were saying about the top 20 contributors. It's like, why is a private organization like giving $750 million to the World Health Organization? Like what?
All right, and in case everyone's not mad enough about this chart, right,
and that's in 1 year. That's not just like lifetime, like.
Right,
things.
exactly.
That's
and then if you go just a little bit below the surface, right? I'm pulling it up here so I don't misquote anything. Give me 1 sec. So, why I didn't anticipate needing this on my screen already, I don't know, but here we are.
That's all right.
All right, so let's look at this, right? So you got Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at number 2, but then if you go down to number 6, you've got the Gavi Alliance. The Gavi Alliance is another organisation that promotes mass vaccination, and do you know the biggest funder to the Gavi Alliance is?
Bill
and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? And they also put a lot of money into Rotary, who are at number like 8 or 9 on that list as well.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you dig into that list even a little bit deeper, it's even worse than it looks on the surface. And so you can make the argument, man, this philanthropist is doing amazing things for society and giving a lot of money away. If you believe that the intentions are all good, or even if the intentions are good, that like his assessment of what should happen is correct. But that is a huge amount of influence to be concentrated in so few hands.
It's concerning. It's concerning that more people aren't like, and because we're not even saying that he has bad motivations. It's just like, should we not be a little bit skeptical of his motivations? Like,
I mean, I don't know the man, Josh. He might think that what he's doing is worthy of a sainthood. I don't know, but I disagree with his ideologies, and they're being forced down my throat. And I'm sure I'm not the only one.
Yeah. It's just the idea that he can't be wrong. Like that this can't be wrong is the thing that gets me. And it's like, look, international cooperation on the topic of anything is theoretically a good idea, but when that body becomes too powerful, then it becomes impossible for the world to have nations trying different things, and making sovereign decisions.
Like if we go back to that, like, you know, that idea about most people aren't, you know, inherently nefarious or evil. They're just acting in alignment with their incentives, right? So if you work at the WHO and you go there and you work in good faith and you do your very best, and you think that what you're doing there is good work, naturally you try to increase your ability to do more of it. You know, and you will not tend to do things that disrupt the funding model, and you will try to get more funding, and you will try to get more power to do more of what it is that you think is good. You know, and I think that, you know, the vast majority of the people who are working there probably think that they are doing good in the world, but it's got to the point where that beast is just too big and too heavily influenced by too few people to be safe for the world.
Yeah. Well, that feels like a nice note, unfortunately, on which to leave things. It's been a great chat, and I wish we'd had time for more, but unfortunately I have a full work day ahead of me.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to bounce, but Paul, it's been a pleasure. I'd love to have you back on at some point. We'll chat more about how we're all fucked.
All right. Thank you, Josh. Yeah, let me sign off by saying this, man. Let me say this. Although everything I write seems to be like tarred with negativity and anger, I'm actually like an intensely optimistic and positive person. I just think that all these things need big spotlight shined on them. So, I'm doing my best to do that.
Yeah. No, I find it the same. It's like the world's falling apart and I'm having the best year ever. It's like
bingo. There you go.
Yeah. I don't know.
Man, I live in a house by the beach with a beautiful wife and a healthy kid. I think we'd be happier.
Sounds like a nice job, man. Although maybe not the lack of sleep, but that's
it's a passing phase.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Eventually.
Yeah. Anyway, that's really want to thank you for your time, man. Everybody check out Critical Sway. I'll put the links in the description below. There's some really interesting threads, not just on the stuff we've talked today, but there's one about that I hope we might get to, but we've kind of touched on the idea of impunity versus accountability for our politicians, which is a really interesting read. And yeah, man, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for chatting.
Thanks, Josh. Much appreciated.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the podcast. If you want to leave us a comment, that would be awesome. Please like, share, subscribe, and if you're listening on Apple, please leave us a review. Until next time, thanks for listening.